It's a quick one. Last video hit over 100 comments, which is absolutely mind-blowing for this channel. Let's try that again for this video. Comment down what you think about these stories, or just a hello, and the team will reply. We always reply to the comments. As always, please like and subscribe and help this channel grow. Thank you. I still vividly remember every detail of that ill-fated night I matched with Phil on Tinder. It had started off so normally, like all my other online dates. His profile picture showed a handsome face with kind eyes and a warm smile. His bio said he enjoyed hiking, watching documentaries, and trying new restaurants around town, all interests we seemed to share. After chatting for a couple weeks, he seemed genuine and down to earth, so I eagerly agreed when he asked me out for dinner. The night arrived and he picked me up right on time, greeting me with a friendly hug. He had chosen a cozy Italian restaurant not far from his place. Over our delicious meal, the conversation flowed effortlessly. He told me about his job as an accountant, his family back in his hometown, and how he had recently gotten into yoga. I found him so easy to talk to and was instantly charmed by his good-natured sense of humor. After dinner, he invited me back to his home for a nightcap. I hesitated briefly, as I don't normally go home with someone on a first date, but he seemed perfectly harmless, so I accepted. We picked up a bottle of wine and arrived at his place, which was a simple but tidy bachelor pad. He gave me a quick tour, ending in the living room where he poured us each a glass. I settled onto the couch, and that's when I noticed the photos. His walls were covered with framed pictures, mostly artsy nature shots and some family photos. But sprinkled among them were many photos of a beautiful young brunette woman. In some she was laughing at a hiking trail or posing at a party. She appeared in so many of the photos, I just assumed this must be pictures of his ex-girlfriend. I felt an unexpected pang of jealousy creep in, even though I barely knew Phil. Trying not to overanalyze, I distracted myself by scanning the other photos in the room. But then I noticed the bookshelf next to the TV also held a couple framed photos. There was a picture of the same mystery brunette again, only this time she wasn't smiling in a party photo. It was a candid shot of her in a car, turned sideways and looking off, seemingly unaware that her photo was being taken. Something about her gave me an eerie sense of déjà vu. Squinting closer at the photo, my heart nearly stopped. She looked exactly like me, the long brown hair, light eyes, and even the shape of her nose and lips. It was almost like looking at my long-lost twin. An icy chill ran down my spine. Trying to shake off the creepy feeling, I jokingly asked Phil if he had been stalking me before we met or if he had a secret twin of mine hidden away somewhere. His silence spoke volumes. The playful grin vanished from his face. After an agonizing pause, he finally replied somberly, "No, that was Bethany, my ex-girlfriend." I felt the blood drain from my face. He went on to explain she had disappeared over a year ago, and no one had seen or heard from her since. The police had investigated for months, but eventually deemed it a cold case when there were no leads. I sat stunned, studying this eerily familiar face in the photo. Phil continued, saying that he had never stopped looking for her and was hoping to one day find someone who could fill a void she had left. I felt a chill run through my body at these words. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. I nodded and smiled politely while Phil changed the subject to more lighthearted topics. But inside, my mind was flooded with questions and forming crackpot theories about what might have happened to this Bethany who looked just like me. Later, as Phil walked me to my car, he grabbed my hand and whispered that meeting me felt like destiny. He said I was even more lovely than he could have imagined. Shivers ran down my spine, but not in a romantic way. His gaze seemed almost obsessive now that I knew about Bethany. I quickly pulled my hand away, saying I had to get home. Over the next few days, I couldn't stop obsessing about that photo of Bethany. I tried telling myself it was just an odd coincidence we resembled each other so closely. But something in my gut told me things weren't quite right with Phil's story. Late one night, I finally worked up the nerve to do a search for Bethany missing woman. My heart nearly stopped when I found a news article from 13 months ago reporting on the disappearance of a local graduate student named Bethany Novak. It had to be the same Bethany from Phil's photo. Not only did the woman look identical to me, but the article mentioned Bethany's boyfriend of 3 years was a man named Phil Becker, who was distraught over her sudden disappearance shortly after moving in together. I felt like I was going to be sick. This was no coincidence at all. Phil had clearly been dating this woman right before me, who coincidentally looked exactly like me. Over the next few weeks, I ignored the frequent calls and texts coming from Phil. The few times I answered, I claimed to be busy with work or sick. After what I had uncovered online, there was no way I wanted to continue seeing this guy. His missed connection story had turned from mildly concerning into downright creepy and ominous. I feared what he might be capable of if he was still so hung up on Bethany that he saw out her lookalike a year later. I eventually had to block Phil's number altogether. Who knows what dark secrets lurked in his past with Bethany or what twisted motivations were behind him asking me out. I'm just grateful I found out the disturbing truth before things went any further. After that harrowing experience, I vowed to be much more cautious about who I meet through online dating sites. That supposedly innocent first date easily could have taken a sinister turn if I hadn't picked up on the red flags. The evening etched vivid memories into my brain that will never fully fade, no matter how much time passes. I still remember the day I matched with Josh on Tinder as if it were yesterday. The excitement and butterflies I felt when I saw his profile pop up, those warm brown eyes and sweet smile behind glasses that gave him an approachable, boyish charm. When we started messaging, the conversation just seemed to flow effortlessly. We bonded over our shared quirky tastes, obscure sci-fi novels, indie folk bands, and a love of hiking with our dogs on weekends. After a couple weeks of nonstop messaging, we finally decided to take the plunge and meet up for a first date. I spent an embarrassing amount of time getting ready, changing my outfit 5 times, and fussing with my hair. I don't know why I was so nervous. Josh had already charmed me over with his witty banter and thoughtful questions about my life. But still, taking that leap from online connection to real world was thrilling and terrifying. When I arrived at the cozy restaurant we had picked, Josh was already seated at our table looking just as cute as his photos. He stood up to give me a brief but warm hug before we settled in. The initial moments had that slight awkwardness you expect with a first date, but soon we were chattering away animatedly about our interests, childhoods, and all the minutiae of getting to know someone new. I found myself laughing frequently at Josh's goofy jokes and impressions. He had such a playful, easygoing energy about him that set me at ease right away. We spent hours just talking, the food and drinks seeming like an afterthought. I was really struck by how attentive Josh was, asking thoughtful follow-up questions and remembering tiny details I had mentioned about my friends and family. The time flew by in the blink of an eye. After dinner, we decided to head to a nearby bar that had live music. The conversation continued flowing smoothly, aided along by a drink or two. I learned Josh shared my passion for rescue animals and that he had adopted his sweet pit bull Rex from a local shelter. Talking about Rex's silly antics made Josh positively light up with affection. Seeing that caring, nurturing side only further endeared him to me. By the end of the night, I was pleasantly tipsy and riding high on the butterflies I always feel after connecting with someone new. Josh walked me home, and we shared a sweet, slightly awkward goodnight kiss under the glow of the streetlights. As I watched him walk away, I immediately couldn't wait for our next date. In the following weeks, Josh and I fell into an easy relationship. We explored new restaurants around the city, went on long walks with Rex to the park, cooked dinner together, and cuddled up to binge watch shows. Things were progressing nicely, and I found myself really starting to fall for Josh. Underneath that goofy, carefree exterior, Josh was so thoughtful and loving. He'd surprise me with little gifts just because, or send me cute dog videos to cheer me up on a bad day. About 2 months after that magical first date, I noticed a peculiar message notification from Tinder, a platform I never used anymore. It was from a woman named Amy who asked if I knew where her husband Josh was. My heartbeat quickened, and I immediately felt queasy. Josh had told me he was single, so surely this Amy woman had the wrong guy. Still, doubt crept in, and I couldn't shake that uneasy feeling in my gut. The next time I saw Josh, I casually brought up the message. I watched his face closely for any flickering of hesitation, but he seemed genuinely bewildered. He insisted he didn't know any Amy and it must be a mistaken identity. Josh's perplexed denial was enough to temporarily quell the red flags popping up in my mind. I really wanted to believe I had found an honest connection with Josh, not more games and lies. Over the following weeks, however, 2 other messages appeared in my Tinder inbox. They were from women asking about the whereabouts of their boyfriend or husband, Josh. My heart sank lower with each message as I was forced to accept this gut-wrenching truth. Josh had been deceiving me from that very first perfect date. The next time I saw Josh, I point-blank demanded he tell me the truth about Amy and these other women. After initial feigned confusion, Josh's facade had finally crumbled. He confessed that he had indeed been married to Amy, but had separated right before meeting me. He claimed deep regret and insisted he had genuinely fallen for me. I was reeling. How could my Josh have constructed such an elaborate lie? In disbelief and profound hurt, I ended things on the spot. In the painful aftermath, I learned far uglier truths about the stranger I had trusted my heart to. Amy reached out to me, and we compared notes about Josh's two-faced duplicity. He had been juggling multiple relationships for years, carefully utilizing fake names, jobs, and even disguises to string countless women along. He had drained their savings accounts before vanishing without a trace. I began to feel nauseous imagining just how much cruel manipulation I had been blind to in those loving gazes and casual jokes. With distance from the fantasy I had built with Josh, it became chillingly clear what a master manipulator he was. He had become adept at morphing into whatever a woman desired most, keeping us too dazzled to peer behind the mask. I was no exception, ignoring all the subtle red flags because I so wanted to believe our love was real. If those messages hadn't appeared, who knows just how much Josh could have deceived and used me. My experience with Josh left me much warier of letting others into my heart so easily. It taught me monsters rarely look the part. They can appear as your soulmate right until they finally reveal their true nature. Romance and infatuation are meaningless unless grounded by time and consistency that reveal someone's character. I was fortunate to escape with just emotional wounds. So many other women had their lives shattered by Josh's cruelty. Wherever he is out there now, I can only hope he faces the karma he deserves. As for me, I am stronger and wiser for surviving Josh's web of lies. The real gift was the warning it provided moving forward. Even when you think you know someone, question everything if your gut whispers subtly it's too good to be true. What Josh and I seemed to share was only an illusion, but the insight it brought into the darkness that can hide behind sweet words was painfully real. I'm grateful that I can now spot the wolves among the sheep before bearing my soul too brazenly. Deceit leaves scars, but they remind us to tread carefully and trust our instincts to protect what really matters. When I first matched with Eric on Tinder, I was excited at the prospect of going on a date with someone new. We had chatted for a few days and really seemed to hit it off. He was charming, funny, and easy to talk to over text. So when he suggested meeting up for drinks, I readily agreed. The day of the date, I took extra time getting ready, wanting to look nice for our first meeting. I styled my hair, did my makeup, and picked out a cute outfit, nothing too dressy, but still date-worthy. As I drove to the bar where we had planned to meet, I felt a mix of nerves and anticipation. I wondered if we had the same witty banter in person that we did over text. When I walked into the dimly lit bar, I immediately spotted Eric waiting by the door. He looked just like his photos, tall with sandy brown hair and sharp, handsome features. He flashed me a radiant smile as I approached, seeming genuinely happy to see me. We exchanged slightly awkward hellos and settled into a small high-top table. The conversation started out a bit stilted as we adjusted to talking face-to-face instead of via text. But after we ordered some drinks and appetizers, we began to relax. We chatted about our jobs, hobbies, favorite shows to binge watch, all the usual first date topics. I was relieved to find that Eric was just as funny and charming in real life. His enthusiasm was infectious, and he seemed fully engaged in our discussion. After an hour or so, Eric offered to get me another drink. I hesitated for a moment, not wanting to overdo it on a first date. But I was really enjoying his company, so I said yes to another cocktail. When he returned with my drink, we clinked our glasses together and carried on with our lively conversation. About halfway through that second drink, though, something started to feel. At first it was subtle, just a slight dizziness and fuzziness around the edges. But within minutes, it intensified. The bar suddenly felt stiflingly hot. My limbs began to tingle and my head felt increasingly foggy. I shook my head a bit, trying to clear it, but the woozy disorientation only grew worse. I looked up at Eric, confused and unnerved by how rapidly I was deteriorating. But he just smiled back innocuously and launched into another story. As he talked, his voice sounded garbled and far away, like he was at the end of a tunnel. I tried to understand what he was saying, but I could barely process anything. Panic began to set in as I realized something was very wrong. I attempted to stand up from my stool, thinking I just needed some fresh air. But my legs buckled dangerously beneath me. Eric reached out to steady me, his hand firmly gripping my arm. I tried to wrench myself free, a creeping dread welling up inside me. My addled brain could only form one coherent thought. I need to get out of here. This person cannot be trusted. I murmured something about feeling sick, though the words came out slurred beyond recognition. Moving instinctually, I pulled away from Eric's grasp and lurched toward the exit. I bumped clumsily into tables and other patrons, unable to walk a straight line. Everything was spinning violently now. The brightly colored bottles behind the bar blurred into a nauseating kaleidoscope. Even still, I propelled myself forward, using the walls to keep myself upright. I didn't dare look back to see if Eric was following me. I just focused all my energy on getting outside to safety. The rush of cold night air jolted me temporarily back to my senses. I fumbled to get my phone out of my pocket with shaking hands. Who could I call? My roommate, my best friend, and Uber. I squinted down at the screen, struggling to make my fingers cooperate well enough to dial. Before I could make a call, my legs gave out and I sank to the ground, breathing hard. My head lolled back against the brick exterior of the bar. I squeezed my eyes shut, willing myself not to pass out. I knew I needed to get home, but my motor skills were completely shot. By some miracle, I was able to contact my roommate, who arrived in record time. She helped me into the car, demanding to know what happened. But I could barely form a sentence at that point. Waves of nausea and dizziness continued to overwhelm me, even as she drove me home. The rest of the night was a blur of being violently ill as whatever drug I'd ingested worked its way out of my system. My roommate stayed by my side the whole time, caring for me as I vacillated between vomiting and blacking out. I was traumatized by the ordeal, once I was finally clear-headed enough to process it. Eric had seemed so normal, even charming at first, but he must have slipped something in my drink when I wasn't looking. The violation I felt was staggering. In the days after, I withdrew into myself, riddled with anxiety and unable to sleep. I kept replaying those terrifying moments in the bar when I realized I was in danger but could do nothing about it. I didn't report Eric to the police partly because I had no proof. I just wanted to pretend none of it ever happened. A few weeks later, I was shocked when a mutual friend told me that Eric had actually seemed concerned for me that night. According to this friend, Eric claimed he didn't drug me and had no idea what happened. He said he tried to help me and wanted to take care of me. I was conflicted upon hearing this, not knowing what to believe. Had I misjudged the situation? The possibility that Eric was innocent after all gnawed at me, but I still couldn't bring myself to reach out to him. Too much damage had been done. Even if he wasn't directly responsible, I associated him with the most harrowing experience of my life. I wasn't ready to face him again. In the months since, I've worked hard to regain my sense of security. Therapy has helped immensely, allowing me to process the trauma and start rebuilding trust. I still feel anxious going to bars or accepting drinks from guys, but I'm healing little by little. I may never know for sure if Eric was the one who drugged me. Regardless, he represents a loss of control that will always haunt me. Ultimately, I can't go backwards to undo that shattering night. I can only move forward, taking it one day at a time, and hope that the scars will fade so I don't live in fear of my own shadow. I was feeling optimistic going into my date with Stacy tonight. We had matched online a few weeks ago and had some decent conversations over messaging. She seemed witty and easygoing in text, peppering her messages with humor and enthusiasm. Her photos on her dating profile showed a cute petite blonde with trendy clothes, funky glasses, and a cool alternative style. When I suggested meeting up for a movie, she readily agreed and we made plans to see the new horror film on Friday night. I'll admit I felt a small twinge of disappointment when I pulled up to her apartment complex, and she emerged wearing an oversized hoodie and no makeup. She didn't look quite as stylish and put together as in her photos. But I tried not to judge too quickly or be shallow. Maybe she just had a long day at work and wasn't feeling the full glam look for a casual movie date. I greeted her with a polite smile and compliment on her sneakers, though she barely mustered a muttered thank you before climbing into my car. Okay, so no flirting banter yet, but maybe she was just shy and serious at first. I attempted some friendly small talk on the drive to the theater, asking light questions about her week, her job as a barista, and if she was looking forward to the movie. But her answers were mostly clipped one-word responses. She didn't reciprocate with any questions back and seemed completely absorbed by her phone screen the whole ride. By the time we arrived at the theater, the stifling awkward tension was already thick, and I wondered if asking her out had been a mistake. Still, I was determined to give this date a fair shot. I maintained a cheerful demeanor as I bought us tickets and a large popcorn to share, hoping some snacks might lighten the mood. She trailed silently behind me in the lobby and gave a mute shrug when I asked if she also wanted candy or a drink. I grabbed 2 waters along with the popcorn and led the way into the theater, suppressing a disappointed sigh. At this point, my hopes for a fun night weren't high, but I tried to keep an open mind as we took our seats. About 15 minutes into the movie, I cautiously lifted the armrest between us and reached my hand tentatively toward hers, which was resting on the other cup holder. I thought maybe a little gentle touch would help warm her up, but before I'd even made contact, she recoiled sharply. Her sudden jerking movement caused our gigantic popcorn tub to pen directly onto the man sitting in the row in front of us. The victim of the popcorn avalanche angrily jumped up from his seat, cursing loudly at Stacy for her clumsiness and demanding she clean up every last kernel from his clothes and the floor. I sat there stunned, uncertain whether I should try to mediate or just let them sort out this popcorn mess. Before I could react at all, Stacy made the shocking decision to spit directly in the face of the popcorn-soaked angry man. He instantly flushed crimson with rage and looked ready to retaliate, until his girlfriend managed to drag him out of the theater, still cursing and fuming. At that point, I was completely done with this disastrous date. I tersely told Stacy she'd have to find her own way home and headed straight for the exit without looking back. The movie was certainly ruined beyond salvaging. Of all the bad, awkward, or just mediocre dates I've been on, this took the cake for the absolute worst. I barely knew this girl, and she was already stirring up petty drama and volatility. The next morning, when I had cooled down a bit, I texted her that we clearly weren't a match but wished her well. I didn't want to just coast her, but I also had zero desire to ever see her again. She responded with a barrage of scathing insults and accusations about what a jerk I was, which only confirmed I'd made the right call ending things. This girl clearly had some anger issues or self-sabotaging tendencies to work through. In hindsight, I really should have paid closer attention to some potential red flags from the very beginning. Her lack of real conversation or interest in getting to know me during our messaging should have tipped me off that we might not click in person either. And I could tell pretty quickly upon meeting her that night that she seemed to give off weird, unfriendly vibes right off the bat. But I kept trying to give her the benefit of the doubt and overlook those warning signs, rather than just trusting my instincts. At the very least, I'm proud of myself for leaving promptly at the first sign of major trouble, rather than sticking it out through more of her volatile behavior all evening. Sure, the movie was ruined, but escaping with just some spilled popcorn was far better than waiting around for the situation to escalate further. And letting her know the next day that it wasn't going to work out was the right move too, far better than just cowardly costing after the debacle. While it wasn't a violent or dangerously dramatic situation, this first date with Stacy easily goes down as the most cringingly uncomfortable and bizarre I've ever experienced. I've certainly had my fair share of dud dates that went nowhere, or times when I just didn't feel a spark or connection with someone. But nothing could compare to the true awfulness of that night with the popcorn fiasco and spitting showdown. I'm sure the image of this angry girl hocking a loogie into some poor guy's face will go down in my own personal record books as the wildest first date mishap of all time. Going forward, I definitely plan to be much more selective and cautious when it comes to meeting women through online dating again. I'll be sure to have longer, deeper conversations first to try to better gauge if we seem truly compatible before asking someone out. And for first dates, coffee or a quick drink seems a lot safer than committing to a lengthy movie or dinner activity, when it becomes awkward or impossible to exit politely if needed. Most importantly, if I notice any glaring red flags or get weird vibes from someone again, I need to truly listen to and trust my intuition, rather than automatically giving them infinite benefit of the doubt. Here's hoping my next first date is a major improvement over the complete and utter disaster that was Popcorn Spit Girl. I'm still optimistic I'll meet someone chill and fun who actually seems interested in getting to know me too. I know finding the right match may mean kissing a few more frogs along the way first, but the connections that make all those misfires worthwhile are still out there. With some good lessons learned the hard way now under my belt, I'm hopeful for much better first dates and new relationships ahead. I was bubbling with excitement when I got the text from Tristan asking me out. We had matched on a dating app a few weeks prior and had been chatting consistently ever since. He seemed so easygoing and charming over text that I was thrilled when he finally suggested meeting up. Bowling sounded like the perfect casual first date, a public place where we could chat and get to know each other in a light-hearted setting. As soon as I got Tristan's text, I headed straight to my closet to pick out the perfect date outfit. I decided on a silky burgundy top that I knew looked great with my complexion. I paired it with dark skinny jeans and booties since bowling alleys can be a bit grungy. I even took the time to straighten my naturally wavy hair and put on makeup, which I rarely bother doing for non-special occasions. But I wanted to look cute yet still casual for this first meet-up. When I arrived at the bowling alley, I immediately spotted Tristan at the front counter getting us a lane. My first impression was relief that he looked as attractive in real life as in his photos. I've definitely experienced the catfish effect on dating apps before. Tristan and I exchanged quick pleasantries as he handed me my designated bowling shoes. He gave me a subtle once-over and said, "Hey, what's up?" in a smooth voice. As we grabbed bowling balls and headed to our lane, I felt optimistic at how normal Tristan seemed so far. He was polite and low-key, matching the vibe I got during our many pre-date conversations. I settled in and prepared for a night of lighthearted competition and witty banter with my attractive match. But as soon as we started bowling, Tristan's entire demeanor abruptly shifted. The laid-back guy who asked me thoughtful questions over text suddenly transformed into an intensely competitive bully. After my very first throw knocked down only 7 pins, he scrutinized my form and condescendingly told me how to properly hold a ball and swing my arm. Excuse me, just because I'm not a pro bowler doesn't mean I need bowling 101 tutoring, especially not in such a patronizing tone. I brushed it off as him just trying to be helpful and ball in hand by frame 2, but he continued watching my every move like a hawk, criticizing everything I did. He told me I wasn't standing in the correct spot. I was holding the ball at the wrong angle. I wasn't bending my knees enough. This barrage of criticism continued after each frame, even when I got a spare or strike. According to Tristan, nothing I did met his approval. With each nitpicky comment, I felt my shoulders tensing up. This date was supposed to be a casual, pressure-free night, but Tristan had turned it into the championship round of the Bowling World Championships. I didn't understand why he was taking a silly game between new dates so seriously, especially when his unsolicited advice was hindering, not helping. I tried to ignore Tristan's patronizing critiques and rally my confidence. But as his competitive insults continued, I felt myself getting more and more flustered. My throws got worse under his scrutiny and the pressure he was putting on me. I even started making foolish mistakes that I never normally would, like accidentally dropping the ball or letting it trickle down the lane at a snail's pace. Tristan had no sympathy for my cringe-worthy blunders. After one particularly slow roll that knocked down 0 pins, I heard loud laughter from the group of obnoxiously drunk college guys in the lane next to us. I felt my cheeks flush hot with embarrassment. Were they mocking my lane performance? I kept my gaze down, avoiding eye contact, willing the laughter to die down. After another gutter ball fail, the loud boys erupted in chuckles again. It became clear they were taking amusement at my expense, not even attempting to contain their snickers and smirks. In that moment, I felt the first tears start to sting my eyes. I was utterly mortified being ridiculed by those strangers on top of Tristan's constant criticism. This date could not be going any worse. As the tears spilled down my cheeks, Tristan rolled his eyes and told me to cut the waterworks. It was just a friendly game after all. Easy for him to say. He wasn't the one being picked apart and made to feel stupid over something that was supposed to be light fun. Right then I knew I needed to escape this nightmare date immediately. I darted over to grab my purse and cardigan from the dingy seats. I speed-walked directly for the exit, wiping the embarrassed tears from my face as I rushed out the door. I felt an immense wave of relief to be away from Tristan's patronizing insults and the beady eyes of those laughing college boys. But I was also shocked at how drastically wrong things had gone. When Tristan asked me out after pleasant conversation, he came across as a normal, chill guy. Our app chats gave zero indication he would become a hyper-competitive jerk the second we met in person. I was so upset that I wasted an evening dressing up nicely and psyching myself up, just to end up being torn down over bowling of all things. The drive home was a blur as I replayed each cringe-worthy moment. I berated myself for not immediately leaving when Tristan first got weirdly over-competitive and critical. I clearly needed to trust my instincts more on first dates instead of giving jerks the benefit of the doubt. This was a harsh lesson in sussing out red flags early so I could avoid another confidence-crushing disaster date. As I analyzed where I went wrong, I made an important dating resolution. From now on, at the very first negative sign of first meetup, I'm out. No excuses. As soon as a guy reveals his true colors, which clearly Tristan did quickly, I'll cut the date short. I won't let myself be gaslit into thinking I'm overreacting or misreading them. My friends always say I'm too nice and forgiving, but I should be more cautious with strangers. Well, not anymore. I'm now wise to fast exits. While the bowling alley disaster was incredibly uncomfortable, at least it taught me something. I now know what oblivious mistakes to avoid and will be much quicker to eject when my date inevitably reveals himself to be an inconsiderate jerk. Dating is tricky, but I'm determined to get better at trusting myself. No more sticking around and making excuses when guys show their mean streaks right off the bat. From now on, I'll proudly channel my inner ambiance and tell stupid boys boy by the second they step out of line. I still get chills when I think back to that ill-fated first date with Jake. We had matched online and talked for a couple weeks before deciding to meet up. Jake suggested I come over to his place for a movie night. At the time, it seemed low-key and safe. In hindsight, I should have insisted we meet in a public place for the first date. But Jake seemed nice over our messages, so I didn't think much of going to his apartment. I drove over around 7 p.m. on that fateful Friday night. Jake lived in a decent-looking apartment complex not too far from my neighborhood. I parked and walked up the outdoor staircase to locate his unit. The evening summer air was warm with a slight breeze. I remembered Jake said he was in unit 204, so I carefully checked the doors until finding the one with 204 displayed in metal numbers. I was feeling excited, but also a bit nervous, the way you do before meeting someone new from online dating. I took a deep breath and knocked on the door. Jake answered after a few moments, welcoming me inside with a smile. He looked just like his photos, tall and lanky, with warm brown eyes and curly dark hair. We exchanged brief hellos and he led me into the living room. So far, everything seemed perfectly normal. As we debated what movie to watch on Jake's Netflix account, I casually glanced around the living room, taking in the decor. The furniture was all dark leather, and the walls were painted a deep burgundy color. It looked masculine, just as Jake had described his place. But as my eyes scanned the surroundings, they landed on a series of framed photos on the wall that made my heart skip a beat. They were photos of Jake with a very pretty brunette woman, the two of them snuggling and kissing in various romantic locations. In one photo, they sat arm in arm at a restaurant. In another, they stood embracing in a scenic overlook. My mind raced as I tried to make sense of these intimate photos on the wall right before my first date with Jake. Maybe it was his sister or a former girlfriend he was still very close with. But something about it just didn't sit right with me. I was tempted to ask Jake about the mystery woman, but I brushed aside my concerns, not wanting to come across rude or jealous. We settled on watching a new superhero movie Jake had been wanting to see. As he went to the kitchen to make popcorn, I sat awkwardly on the leather couch, alone with my uneasy thoughts. Things still seemed fine on the surface, if not a bit odd. A few minutes later, my nervous contemplation was interrupted when my phone dinged with a text notification. I glanced down and saw it was from Jake, the real Jake apparently. "Hey, running 10 minutes late, be there soon," the message read. My stomach dropped and I froze. The man who had greeted me at the door, who was just in the other room microwaving popcorn, was clearly not the Jake I had been talking to for weeks. Somehow I had ended up at a complete stranger's apartment, mistakenly thinking it belonged to my date. My mind raced trying to comprehend how this terrifying situation could have happened. Jake definitely said he lived in unit 204, and that's exactly where I had gone. But the man who lived here was an imposter who had intentionally posed as Jake and invited me inside. The fake Jake returned all smiles, oblivious to the chilling realization I just had. I knew I needed to get out of there immediately, but also had to stay calm and not raise any suspicion. If he sensed something was wrong, he might try to stop me from leaving. So I feigned a calm demeanor when the imposter sat back down on the couch and cheerfully offered me the popcorn bowl. I claimed I had suddenly started feeling nauseous. He politely asked if I needed anything like water or medicine. I declined as casually as I could, saying I should probably just head home to rest. Though he looked disappointed, the stranger didn't protest or plead for me to stay. He walked me to the door and said to text him later, never letting on that he wasn't the real Jake. I managed to keep my composure until I was inside my car. Then I peeled out of the parking lot as fast as I could. My hands shook and my heart pounded as I drove aimlessly for a bit, before pulling into a gas station to try and collect myself. I couldn't believe this had just happened. I called Jake to explain the bizarre and terrifying situation. The real Jake was shocked to learn someone had impersonated him and lured me to their apartment. He had no idea who the man was or why he would do such a disturbing thing. We'd agreed to meet at a restaurant instead for our first date, needing the very public setting to feel safe again. In retrospect, I never should have trusted such an intimate first date alone at a near stranger's home. I could have suggested meeting somewhere public first to confirm we had the right person. But despite feeling violated by the stranger's sinister ruse, I'm thankful the night didn't end with something much worse happening. Never again will I be so silly when meeting someone new from online. I'm just relieved I realized the truth about the imposter in time to escape safely from that apartment. That chilling evening could have easily ended in tragedy if I hadn't noticed the misleading details. Now, I'm much more vigilant about taking precautions when online dating. Checking for red flags and meeting in low-risk public spaces can help avoid finding yourself in such a dangerous situation ever again. I was bouncing with excitement as I got ready for my first date with Sandra. We had matched on a dating app a few weeks ago and hit it off right away. Her profile picture showed a petite brunette with big hazel eyes and a warm smile that made my heart flutter. Sandra was attentive, intelligent, and had an endearing awkwardness about her that I found so charming. Our conversations flowed effortlessly, and I was amazed at how much we had in common. She loved indie music, hiking, and playing trivia at bars, all interests we shared. I couldn't believe my luck in finding such a perfect match. After weeks of talking nonstop through the app, we finally decided to meet up for dinner downtown. I spent extra time getting ready that evening, nervously checking my hair in the mirror and spraying on cologne. I wanted to look my absolute best for this girl who had captivated me without even meeting yet. My mind raced with possibilities about our future if this date went well. Maybe I had found the one in sweet, quirky Sandra. I imagined us laughing together over dinner, strolling hand in hand downtown after, and sharing a romantic first kiss. She seemed caring, grounded, and so easy to talk to. Exactly what I had been looking for. I started picturing Sandra as my girlfriend, then one day my wife. Even though I was getting way ahead of myself, I couldn't help but daydream about our lives intertwining. This date felt like the start of something meaningful. I arrived early at the trendy new sushi restaurant we had picked in downtown and asked for a table, my foot tapping anxiously. While scanning the busy room filled with first dates and groups of friends, I wondered what our first glimpse of each other in person would be like. How would Sandra react when she saw me standing there waiting for her? I hoped she would give me that radiant smile from her pictures that had made me melt. I was giddy imagining us gazing into each other's eyes and realizing the connection we had forged online over weeks was even stronger in person. This was going to be the first page of our own romantic comedy. I just knew it. I fidgeted with my shirt collar and took some deep breaths to calm my nerves. The hostess arrived back at my table leading a tall, muscular stranger with short brown hair. I stared blankly, immediately confused as this unknown man sat down across from me grinning. "Hey, it's so awesome to finally meet you," he said warmly in a deep voice that did not match the higher-pitched girl I had been expecting. I stammered in bewilderment, unsure how he knew my name and why he had joined me instead of the Sandra I had fixated on meeting all day. As the truth slowly hit me, I reeled in shock. This was Sandra, or whoever had been pretending to be the sweet, thoughtful girl I knew online for weeks. Rage and humiliation immediately washed over me as the muscular imposter sitting across from me smiled obliviously, chatting about our strong connection and future together. I clenched my fists tightly under the table, fuming at being utterly manipulated and lied to by this complete stranger. How long had the person posing as Sandra been deceiving me, laughing behind my back at how easily fooled I was? I numbly nodded along, doing everything I could to hold back frustrated tears as the man rambled excitedly about our personality compatibility and similar interests that had really been fabricated all along. I felt sick thinking someone could be so intentionally cruel to get my hopes up, make me feel understood and cared for, only to rip it all away without a hint of remorse. The waiter approached for our order, but I couldn't stomach a single bite of food. The sushi I had been excitedly anticipating now seemed revolting. I quickly asked for just the check, threw down cash not caring about the change, and mumbled any excuse I could think of to leave this uncomfortable situation immediately. The man's overeager expression crumbled at my abrupt departure after he had clearly anticipated this date lasting long into the night, but I rushed out without looking back or caring about his feelings whatsoever. My pulse was pounding as I hurried down the street away from the restaurant, desperate to put distance between myself and the absolute disaster this anticipated perfect first date had quickly become. I blinked back furious tears, feeling like the biggest fool in the world for ever believing a real connection could form online. The person I had trusted completely to be open and honest with me had brazenly fabricated her entire identity. Was anything Sandra told me actually true, or was it all an elaborate lie? How could I have been so foolish? Getting further away, I pulled out my phone with shaking hands to immediately delete the dating app and any trace of the person I knew as Sandra. I never wanted to come across our conversations. Photos of her were the profile again. Although reeling from this complete betrayal, I knew these hurtful actions said far more about Sandra's own issues than anything about me. I vowed not to internalize this manipulation and let it destroy my self-esteem. Still, my confidence was deeply shaken. Could I trust anyone from online dating sites again after this experience? I wasn't sure when I'd be ready to try meeting someone new virtually after such a jarring first date. For now, I needed time to mourn the imagined future I had built up with the gentle, caring version of Sandra in my mind. I had to process how I could move forward more cautiously and not get overly attached to anyone online, no matter how strong our messaging chemistry seemed. Once the wounds had healed, I hoped to find someone genuine to connect with down the line, not another cruel liar hiding behind a fake profile. I had to hold on to my faith that there were sincere people out there, even if they felt impossible to find. When I was ready to put myself back out there, I knew I needed to be much more wary of catfishes and not invested so much in anyone online in the early stages, no matter how compatible we seemed. For now, I decided to focus on nurturing my real-world friendships that I knew I could trust and rely on, as well as pursuing hobbies that brought me joy and confidence. Eventually, once the painful sting had lessened, I hope to look back on this horror story of a first date as just one bad experience, rather than let it destroy my optimism about dating entirely. This wouldn't be the thing that made me give up on finding love. The sweet, thoughtful Sandra I thought I knew may have been a fabrication, but there had to be someone real like her out there for me someday. Next time, I would just have to be much more cautious and protective of my heart if I ever try online dating again. When I matched with Nathan on that dating app, he had seemed totally normal at first. We had chatted casually through the app for a couple of weeks, just getting to know basic details about each other's jobs, interests, and senses of humor. He came across as very friendly and down to earth in our conversations. I didn't pick up on any red flags. So when he finally asked me out on a real date, suggesting dinner at his apartment because he wanted to cook for me, I was pleasantly surprised and excited. When Nathan sent me his address the afternoon of our date, I plugged it into my phone's map app before heading out just to be sure I knew where I was going. As I drove up to the apartment complex he had directed me to, an unsettled feeling came over me. The building looked completely run down and deserted, with boarded up windows on the lower levels and trash bags piled up on the sidewalk out front. I even pulled up and down the street, thinking maybe I had typed the address in wrong, but the building numbers matched exactly what Nathan had sent me. Uneasy but still wanting to give Nathan the benefit of the doubt, I convinced myself that I was just experiencing normal first date jitters. After all, Nathan had given me no reason to doubt him up to this point. Our conversations had flowed smoothly, he had a normal job, and none of his profile pictures had raised any red flags. Taking a deep breath to settle my nerves, I parked and made my way toward the front entrance of the dilapidated complex. When I finally reached the fading metallic numbers marking Nathan's apartment, I stood frozen for a moment trying to slow my escalated heartbeat. Part of me wanted to turn and run back down those ominous stairs, fleeing whatever situation I had wandered into. But the more rational part of me felt that would be an overreaction. After all, I had no concrete reason to be scared in that moment. Just because the building wasn't fancy and upscale didn't mean Nathan had ill intentions. So I willed myself to lift a shaking hand and knock softly on the door. Nathan appeared instantly, as if he had been waiting expectantly right on the other side. His bright, cheerful grin immediately set me slightly more at ease. He welcomed me inside enthusiastically, seeming not to notice my obvious tension. As he led me further into the apartment, I tried not to gape at the complete lack of decor or personalization. No art, no photos, no colorful accessories of any kind interrupted the sterile white walls and dull gray carpet. The living room contained just a folding chair facing a small TV on a plastic crate. The kitchen was visible from where we stood, looking just as sparse with only plain white dishes neatly stacked on the counter. It could have been an abandoned office or foreclosed property rather than someone's home. But Nathan appeared totally comfortable and oblivious to the oddness of our surroundings. He was already bustling around the kitchen area, rattling pans and setting out ingredients he had picked up for our meal. He had set a little card table with mismatched thrift store plates and silverware, the nicest setting that this bare apartment could accommodate. A few battery-operated candles provided the only mood lighting. I hovered awkwardly just inside the doorway, nerves creeping back in at the complete foreignness of it all. Who lived like this? And why have I agreed to this very intimate scenario for a first date with a man I'd never actually met before? We attempted some stilted small talk as Nathan cooked, but I kept getting distracted by every little creak or groan of the old building. My eyes kept darting down the dark, narrow hallway, irrationally afraid someone might jump out even though we were clearly alone. At one point, I thought I detected muffled voices and footsteps from the apartment next door. When I asked Nathan whether his neighbors were home, he casually dismissed it as just a television, though I detected a shiftiness in his eyes that contradicted his words. I considered probing further or just walking out the door to safety, but some misplaced obligation to see this evening through kept me rooted to the spot. Eventually, we sat down to eat the underwhelming meal Nathan had prepared, some sort of dry chicken with mushy vegetables that I could barely force down over the growing lump in my throat. Between meager bites, he launched into enthusiastic stories about his job and coworkers, either not noticing or not caring that I was merely nodding along silently with a plastered-on polite grin. The entire time, I kept straining to hear any other movements around us. I flinched at each muffled thump or indistinct murmuring that hinted at others' presences despite Nathan's earlier assurance we were alone. The candles flickered eerily in my peripheral vision no matter how steadily I kept my gaze trained on Nathan. I needed to get out of there immediately, away from whatever sinister situation my trust had led me into. As soon as the last bite had been forced down, I awkwardly announced that I really had to get going due to an early gym class the next day. Nathan seemed disappointed, asking if I had room for the chocolate cake he had picked up for dessert. But I held firm, standing up from the table and gathering my things in preparation to leave. Something about the way his stare followed me around the small apartment as I moved made my skin crawl. Nathan walked me to the front door, the floor creaking under his footsteps right behind me. At the doorway, he gently grabbed my hand and told me earnestly that he had a nice time and would love to see me again soon. I avoided meeting his intense gaze, mumbling some non-committal reply. Voices echoed from an apartment down the hall, heightening the urgency pounding through me. Carefully, I slid my hand out of Nathan's grip. His fingers clung to mine for just a second too long before letting me go. I felt his presence close behind me as I hurried to the stairwell and began descending to safety. The entire lonely walk down the 4 silent floors. I expected to hear Nathan's footsteps chasing after me, calling out my name. But the only sounds were the squeaks of my own panicked footsteps and the pounding of blood in my ears. I didn't allow myself to exhale or look behind me until I made it back to the heavy front door and out into the blessedly cool night air. With shaking hands, I unlocked my car and slid inside, immediately locking the doors again once I was safely ensconced within. Only once I had pulled away from the curb and driven a few blocks did I finally start breathing normally again. I kept checking the rearview mirror, irrationally expecting to see Nathan's pickup truck following me home, but the only set of headlights behind me were from a minivan going a different direction. I never heard from Nathan again after that bizarre and terrifying night. To this day, I still have no idea what exactly his story was or what might have happened to me if I had stayed there longer. Perhaps he truly meant no harm, but simply lived an unconventional lifestyle that my mainstream sensibilities couldn't relate to. But my gut instinct tells me I avoided something much more sinister by listening to my intuition and fleeing a situation that felt undeniably wrong. It was supposed to be a fun, creative date. Simon, a professional photographer, had invited me to his studio for a photo shoot. I should have known something was off when he got so excited about the idea. I figured it would be a unique experience. Little did I know the nightmare that was about to unfold. Simon greeted me at the door of his studio, his eyes gleaming with enthusiasm. "Welcome, Laura. I'm so glad you could make it. Wait until you see what I have planned." He ushered me inside, the space filled with an array of lighting equipment and cameras. It all looked very professional, which put me at ease initially. As he directed me to a section of the studio with a simple backdrop, I took in all the details around me. The lights were bright and hot, casting dramatic shadows across the room. Cables snaked along the floor, coiled and ready to empower the complex setup. Lenses of all sizes were stacked neatly on shelves and tables, glinting like eyes waiting to capture the scene. Simon told me to get comfortable and relax. Just be yourself, he said with an eager smile. I assumed he wanted natural, candid shots, so I did my best to forget the camera was there and let my guard down completely. I tried to loosen up as he made small talk, asking about my interests and my experience with photography. I opened up willingly, not sensing any red flags. The first few photos went smoothly. Simon would give me gentle direction, then step back and snap a few shots. The camera would click and whir softly, Simon nodding with satisfaction at the images he saw through the viewfinder. It actually started to feel fun, like we were collaborating on an artistic project together. I began striking more playful poses, embracing the creativity of it. But as the shoot went on, I noticed Simon's demeanor beginning to shift. His expressions became more intense, his gaze lingering on parts of my body. The friendly banter ceased, replaced by specific demands about how I should move or expressions I should make. He told me exactly how to stand, where to look, how to hold my body. I would comply, thinking he just wanted a certain composition. At first, I didn't think much of Simon's evolving direction, figuring he was just trying to get the perfect shot. But then he started commenting on my vulnerability and the raw emotion he was supposedly capturing. The way he said it made me uncomfortable, like he was viewing me as an object rather than a person. I began to fold my arms across myself protectively, no longer feeling the fun creative vibe of earlier. Suddenly, Simon put down his camera and approached me intently. Laura, you have to understand, this isn't just a simple photo shoot. This is my art. I'm capturing the true essence of my subjects, their innermost feelings and desires. He paused, his eyes boring into mine. You, my dear, are the perfect subject for my next exhibit. I felt the chill run down my spine at his words. Exhibit. What was he talking about? I stammered some questions, trying to make sense of what sinister vision he seemed to have. But Simon dismissed my concerns, saying I would understand soon enough. My mind started racing, wondering what kind of exhibition he meant, and what exactly he aimed to capture of me. The rest of the shoot felt like a hazy dream. I went through the motions, posing how Simon directed, all while my thoughts were screaming warnings. What did he really want from me? What was going on in that calculating mind of his? I felt powerless, like I was his pawn to be manipulated. When the shoot was finally over, Simon led me to a door in the back of the studio. There's one more thing I want to show you, he said, holding the door open expectantly. Against my better judgment, I stepped through. As Simon flipped on the light, I was met with a sight so disturbing it will likely haunt me forever. The hidden room was filled with framed photos, thousands of them, lining every inch of the walls. But these weren't the elegant artistic nudes from our session. No, these were covered, voyeuristic images of women of all ages and backgrounds. Some were in public going about mundane tasks, unaware they were being photographed. Others appeared vulnerable in intimate settings, partially dressed or sleeping. My heart pounded as I realized many were women I knew, relatives, friends, acquaintances, victims of his twisted obsession. Finally, my eyes fell upon a whole section dedicated to me. Image after image showed me doing everyday activities, picking up coffee, walking my dog, shopping at the market. All candid photos taken without my knowledge, stolen moments from my private life. I whirled around, my body trembling with shock and rage. What is this? How long have you been stalking me? I demanded. Simon just smiled calmly, as if he'd been waiting for this moment. Isn't it glorious? I've been building this collection for years, capturing femininity, appreciating the female form. He swept his arm across the gallery of exploitation. Do you see now? You are going to be the new centerpiece. His words turned my blood to ice. I felt the room start to spin, the violations sinking in. This wasn't art. It was a sick compulsion, a complete disregard for human dignity or consent. I was just another target for his urges, about to be stripped of my free will. I lunged for the exit, but Simon blocked the way, that eerie smile never leaving his face. Now, don't fight this. You will be immortalized forever in my greatest exhibit. He reached for me as I screamed and clawed at him frantically. By some miracle, I broke free of his grasp and fled through the studio in blind terror. I pictured him yelling that I would never escape, his voice growing fainter as I ran and ran. I didn't stop until I reached my home, collapsing inside as hysterical sobs tore through me. What followed was a suffocating period of darkness and paranoia. I filed a police report, but Simon had vanished by the time they searched his studio. The violating photos of me still haunted my thoughts. I hardly slept, jolting awake at every small sound. I withdrew from family and friends, unwilling to trust anyone. It took everything in me to start feeling free again, to push back against the fear Simon wanted to instill in me. The road to reclaiming myself was long, but gradually the light returned and my strength. I refused to be his victim any longer. As for Simon, he was eventually caught trying to recruit new subjects for his disturbing exhibitions. The police found archives of photos spanning decades, hundreds of victims. He showed no remorse, believing until the end that his crimes were art. The whole experience left wounds that may never fully heal, but it also gave me a resolve to never take my autonomy for granted, to honor the bravery and wisdom that helped me escape and rebuild. That is the only silver lining I can take from the horror of that deception. I am strong, I am free, and no one will ever take that away from me again. I still can't believe the disastrous date I had last night. It was genuinely one of the most uncomfortable and disturbing experiences of my life. I went into it excited and optimistic, hoping to meet someone new and potentially form a meaningful connection. But it quickly spiraled into a nightmare scenario that left me feeling disturbed, unsafe, and eager to get as far away as possible. When I first matched with Mike on the dating app, he seemed normal enough. We exchanged some messages about shared interests, cracking a few jokes back and forth. He was quick to suggest meeting up for dinner, but I didn't think much of it at the time. Looking back now, I see the red flags that I overlooked, the overeagerness, the thinly veiled urgency to meet up right away. But in the moment, I chalked it up to excitement at the potential of a new romantic prospect. I hesitated briefly before accepting the dinner invitation, but his messages had been pleasant. He was attractive in his photos, and I ultimately decided to give him the benefit of the doubt. I figured one date couldn't hurt, and I was hoping to meet someone worthwhile. So I agreed to dinner that Friday night at a cute little Italian restaurant downtown. From the moment I arrived and locked eyes with Mike, I could sense something was off. He seemed fidgety and nervous in a way that immediately put me on edge. When we sat down, he began bombarding me with questions about my age, relationship status, and family life. I answered politely, though I was puzzled by his fixation on these rather personal topics for a first date. That's when he dropped the first bombshell, confessing that he has a thing for older women. I'm only 35, barely older than he is, but I still felt instant discomfort at this admission. As our food arrived, his questions became increasingly inappropriate. He kept staring at me intently with an unsettling gaze, commenting on my appearance and asking prying questions about intimate details of my life. I nearly choked when he casually asked if I was still breastfeeding my two kids. I was so shocked and appalled that someone would think that was an appropriate thing to discuss on a first date with a total stranger. I felt myself go pale as I stammered some excuse about needing to use the restroom. In the dingy bathroom, I gripped the edges of the sink, staring at myself in the mirror and wondering if I could sneak out through the window. The idea of spending one more minute with this guy made me want to vomit. I knew I needed to leave right away. Somehow I made it through the rest of the excruciating dinner, squirming in my seat as Mike made increasingly vulgar and uncomfortable remarks. He kept calling me mommy and mama, pleading with me to let him refer to me by those cringe-worthy nicknames. When he asked if he could be my little boy, I nearly lost it. The second the waitress came to clear our plates, I snatched out my purse and jacket without a word. Mike protested as I stormed out of the restaurant, making feeble apologies mixed with more inappropriate comments. I felt his eyes on me as I rushed to hail a cab, my hands shaking and pulse racing. The entire cab ride home, I berated myself for being so stupid. How could I not have realized sooner that something was very wrong with this guy? I replayed every creepy comment, every alarming behavior, mentally kicking myself for not listening to my intuition. I felt tainted somehow, haunted by Mike's menacing presence and unsettling remarks. That night, I told a close friend about the date, and she was as horrified as I was. We wondered if I should report Mike to the dating site, worried about what he might do to other women. But in the end, I just wanted to put the whole traumatizing night behind me. I deleted my dating profile immediately so I'd never have to see his face again. In the following days, I found myself infuriated every time I recounted the details to someone. I couldn't believe Mike thought any of that was okay, that he somehow justified his predatory language and ideas as normal first date conversation. I worried too about the ethical implications if he actually did have unhealthy urges toward children or non-consenting adults. My friends tried to reassure me that most guys aren't like Mike, but my trust was shaken. I decided to take a long break from dating, unwilling to take a risk like that again. As the months passed, I focused on work, family, and hobbies, anything to keep my mind off that nightmarish evening. While the discomfort has faded over time, I still feel occasional pangs of unease when I think back to Mike and his bizarre fetishes and inappropriate behavior. I'm grateful I was able to remove myself from the situation relatively unscathed, but I often think about the other women who may have encountered him, both before and after me. That evening shaped my approach to dating and trusting strangers. I'm now much more cautious about online dating, keeping early conversations focused on hobbies and interests rather than personal topics. At the first sign of a red flag, I'm quick to cease contact and protect myself. Sometimes I still tense up when meeting someone new, bracing for signs of secret perversion or ill intent. But experiences like mine have made me vigilant about my own safety and boundaries. Though that horrific first date was an outlier in my dating life, its impact lingers. I'm no longer quite so trusting or optimistic when meeting men online, but I'm wiser now too, more attuned to warning signs and committed to trusting my gut. My friends still tell me not all guys are like Mike, and slowly, I'm starting to believe that again. I was so excited when Jimmy asked me out. We had met at a friend's party a few weeks ago and really hit it off. He was funny, charming, and we seemed to have so much in common. We both loved hiking, indie films, and playing guitar. I thought he was really cute too. So when he asked for my number and then called a few days later to ask me to dinner and a movie, I immediately said yes. The day of our date, I spent extra time getting ready, full of optimistic energy. I curled my hair and did my makeup just so. I wanted to look perfect for him. I picked out a new floral dress I had been saving for a special occasion and matched it with dainty jewelry. I sprayed on my favorite perfume and slipped on my most flattering heels. I felt beautiful and giddy as I checked myself out in the mirror before heading to the restaurant. Jimmy was already waiting at a table when I arrived, and he stood up to give me a hug. He looked great in a button-down shirt and nice pants. I'd noticed he had brought me a little bouquet of daisies, which he remembered were my favorite flower from one of our conversations. I was charmed that he had put such thought into this gesture. We sat across from each other, and the conversation flowed easily over dinner. We talked about our shared interests, upcoming concerts, favorite hiking trails, beloved indie movies. With each topic, I found myself thinking, wow, we really do have so much in common. It reinforced my initial feeling that we just clicked on some wavelength. After we finished eating, Jimmy suggested we skip going to the movie, get dessert somewhere else, and then take a walk through a nearby park. That sounded perfect to me. The restaurant was getting loud, and I was much more interested in spending time talking with him alone. As we walked hand in hand and talked more over dessert, I started daydreaming about what it would be like to be Jimmy's girlfriend. When we got to the park, the sun was starting to set, casting a warm golden glow over everything. It was perfectly romantic. Jimmy gently reached for my hand as we strolled. I happily laced my fingers through his, thrilled by how well everything was going. I felt like I was in the beginning of a sweet indie romance film. But during our walk, I started to feel odd. Jimmy began copying some of my mannerisms, from the way I tucked my hair behind my ears to my hand gestures as I talked. It was subtle, but noticeable once I picked up on it. I shrugged it off, thinking maybe he was just nervous and trying to build rapport by mirroring me on our first date. We stopped to get ice cream from a cute shop on the edge of the park. Jimmy insisted on ordering for me, remembering my favorite flavor from one of our earlier conversations. It was certainly sweet that he had paid such close attention to remember those kinds of details about me, but it also gave me a twinge of unease. As we ate our ice cream and walked back to our cars, he began mimicking the way I licked my cone and the little noises I made after each bite. At this point, I felt very weirded out. When we got back to the parking lot, Jimmy grabbed both my hands and looked deeply into my eyes. He professed how he felt like he had known me forever after just this one date. He said meeting me was the best thing to ever happen to him. This would normally be lovely to hear on a first date, but his intensity and over-the-top declarations felt alarming instead of romantic. I tried to gently pull my hands away, but he held on tighter. As I drove home, my jiddiness had transformed into an unsettled feeling. I replayed the entire evening in my head. So much of our conversation had involved him asking probing questions about my job, my family, my childhood, topics that would normally come up later once you were getting serious with someone. I started to feel like the date had been more of an interrogation than just getting to know each other. And all those little details about me remembered so perfectly. My favorite flower, ice cream order, the stories I told at the party we met at. How could he recall all of that after one brief conversation? A few things, sure, but this felt like more than just a good memory. I thought back to how he began imitating me during our walk, how intensely he grabbed my hands. It wasn't out of care or attraction, but something more sinister. Once I was home, I did a deep dive on Jimmy's social media, scoring it for clues. His posts were all about his obsession with finding his soulmate and detailed manifestations of his perfect partner. Scrolling back months revealed he had been fixated on this for a long time. Then I discovered that he had been subtly following me online for months. He had joined the hiking group I organized, watched old gay videos of my band, and even found my senior prom photos that I had untagged myself from years ago. My heart sank realizing that tonight hadn't been a wonderful first date. It had been the carefully orchestrated plan of a stalker who had been gathering information about me for a long time. Every moment he mirrored my behaviors wasn't to build rapport, but because he had studied and memorized all my quirks and habits. Everything he did and said was to portray my ideal partner, learned entirely from following me and collecting details about my life. I immediately blocked Jimmy on everything I could find and made all my accounts private. I was thoroughly creeped out knowing he had been lurking for so long before making contact under the guise of a charming first date. I realized I would have to be much more careful about what I posted publicly online if I ever wanted to date safely again. Though our date had seemed so promising at first, I now knew that Jimmy was unhinged and dangerous. I was proud of myself for picking up on the subtle red flags instead of dismissing my concerns and putting myself in harm's way. I was fortunate that nothing worse happened, but it was still an incredibly unsettling experience. This was certainly a first date that I would never forget for all the wrong reasons, but an important lesson about listening to my instincts and protecting myself when someone's behavior became threatening. I was hopeful about finding a healthy relationship someday, but knew I would need to be more cautious moving forward after almost falling prey to a stalker's grooming techniques. At least I was safe at home now and empowered by the knowledge to better spot and avoid manipulators and predators trying to disguise themselves as good dating prospects. I'll never forget the night I met her. It was a Friday night and I had decided to go to Murphy's, my favorite local bar, to have a few drinks and unwind after a long week of work. As soon as I walked in, I noticed her sitting alone at the end of the bar. She had long, dark, wavy hair that fell past her shoulders and bright blue eyes that seemed to sparkle even in the dim lighting of the bar. I made my way over and took the empty seat next to her, trying to come up with a smooth opening line, but finding myself uncharacteristically tongue-tied in her presence. After a few minutes of silently nursing my beer, she was the one who broke the ice, asking me about the book I had brought with me. I was so relieved that she had spoken first that I immediately launched into a detailed description of the spy thriller I was reading, probably seeming like a rambling idiot. But she didn't seem to mind my nervous energy, and we fell into easy conversation. Over the next few hours, we talked about our shared interests, obscure bands, old black and white movies, hole-in-the-wall restaurants. I was amazed at how much we had in common and how effortless and natural our conversation flowed. When the last call came, I knew I wasn't ready for the night to end. We stood outside the bar as I worked up the nerve to ask for her number. When she smiled and handed me her phone so I could plug in my digits, I was ecstatic. We exchanged a few texts over the next day and made plans to meet up again a few nights later for dinner and a movie. As I drove home that morning with the sunrise peeking over the horizon, I couldn't stop smiling. I felt lighter and more optimistic than I had in years. Over dinner on our second date, the conversation turned more personal as we opened up about our families, childhoods, and dreams for the future. She was intelligent, driven, and compassionate. I found myself falling quickly under her spell, wanting to spend every free moment in her company. We started seeing each other nearly every night, whether it was meeting for a drink after work or cooking dinner and watching a movie at my apartment. A month later, I was head over heels in love. I had never believed in ideas like fate or soulmates until I met her. It seemed impossible that two people could have so much in common and just click so completely. While I knew it was fast, I was ready to take our relationship to the next level, and so was she. The night I asked her to make it official and be my girlfriend is one of my happiest memories. Over the next few blissful weeks, I couldn't remember ever being so content. I wanted to learn everything about her, from her quirky habits to her deepest secrets. One night, as we lay tangled up together in my bed, I decided it was time to broach the subject of family. I started chattering happily about my parents and siblings, telling funny stories from my childhood. She cuddled closer as she listened, a pensive look on her delicate features. When I finally asked about her family, she tensed up. She haltingly explained that her parents had divorced acrimoniously when she was very young. Her mother had remarried quickly, and her new stepfather had a son from a previous marriage. The family had been through a painful period of adjustment to their new blended dynamic. She seemed emotional and sad recounting these difficult memories. I squeezed her hand supportively and told her I was glad she felt comfortable opening up to me. It wasn't until later that night, as I lay awake, replaying our conversation in my head, that a thought struck me like a bolt of lightning. With dawning horror, I realized that the stepbrother she spoke of sounded very familiar. Too familiar. My heart dropped into my stomach as I scrambled to access old family photos on my phone, hoping desperately that I was wrong. But there was no mistake. The lanky, awkward boy with a crooked smile looking back at me was unquestionably me. The gorgeous, vivacious woman I had fallen in love with was my half-sister. I felt like I might vomit or pass out from the shock. How could I have not realized it earlier? Now each of our bizarre similarities took on a twisted, sinister feeling. Every laugh, every intimate moment suddenly felt tainted. Over the next few days, I withdrew completely, ignoring her concerned texts and calls. I knew I owed her an explanation, but the shame was just too overpowering. I felt like a fool, an idiot for not figuring it out sooner and allowing myself to develop feelings for my own sister. The despair was overwhelming. I fell into a deep depression, showing up late to work, declining invitations from friends. I just wanted to be alone with my tortured thoughts. Despite my best efforts, I couldn't stop thinking about her. Part of me thought maybe we could move past this, just forget we were ever related. But the realistic part of me knew that was impossible. We could never have a normal, healthy relationship given our blood ties. As the weeks turned into months, I started to slowly emerge from the fog I had been lost in. I tried dating other women, but my heart wasn't in it. I had lost my faith in connections and chemistry, now seeing them as random occurrences devoid of meaning. I doubted I would ever feel as strongly for someone as I had for her. My sister, my soulmate, my greatest regret. Years later, I still carry those bittersweet memories with me everywhere. I wonder where she is now, if she's found happiness with someone else, if she's married, has kids. Does she still think of me too? I know realistically we can never be more than strangers, but a small, irrational part of me still wishes things could be different. I know now it was foolish to get so attached without knowing everything about her first. Some doors, once opened, can never be closed again. I walked blindly through one of those doors and now have to live forever with the consequences. I still remember that fateful night I first met Ella like it was yesterday. I had just gotten out of a long-term relationship a few months prior and decided I was ready to get back into dating again. My buddy Eric suggested I try this relatively new dating app called Tinder, since that seemed to be where all the cool kids were meeting these days. I was skeptical at first, but figured I had nothing to lose by setting up a profile. After downloading the app and linking it to my Facebook for some basic info, I spent about half an hour trying to curate the perfect selection of photos. I chose a variety of shots, including me with friends, playing with my dog, dressed up for a wedding, and one shirtless at the beach just to show off a little. I tried to paint an image of a fun, outgoing guy with varied interests. Once my profile was ready to go, I started nervously swiping. In the beginning, I was too picky and found myself constantly rejecting potential matches for petty reasons. But over the next few days, I softened my criteria and gave more women a chance. I began to match with a few different ladies and started chatting to see if we clicked. After a week or so of light conversations going nowhere, I finally matched with a girl named Ella whose profile caught my eye. She was blonde, petite, and absolutely gorgeous in her photos. Her bio said she recently moved to the city and enjoyed trying new restaurants, watching scary movies, and traveling. This seemed right up my alley, so I sent her a quick hello and compliment. To my surprise and delight, she responded immediately. Ella and I hit it off quickly through the app. Our banter flowed easily and we made each other laugh. After several days of increasingly flirty messages, I finally worked up the courage to ask her out to dinner. To my relief, she enthusiastically accepted the date invitation. We picked a cool Japanese restaurant downtown that Friday night at 8 p.m. When the big night arrived, I took extra time getting ready, making sure my outfit and hair looked just right. I splashed on a little cologne and gave myself a final pep talk in the mirror before heading out. I arrived at the restaurant 10 minutes early and waited nervously by the hostess stand. Right at 8 p.m., I looked up and saw Ella walk in looking just as fabulous as her pictures. She gave me a little wave and flashed her dazzling smile. I was already smitten. The date progressed even better than I could have imagined. The conversation flowed smoothly once we got past some initial first date awkwardness. I found myself getting lost in her hypnotic blue eyes throughout dinner. Everything just felt so natural with Ella. We closed the restaurant down after talking for hours. Since the night was still young, we decided to grab an Uber to a lively bar downtown for a few drinks. The alcohol lowered our inhibitions even more, and we became flirtier with each passing cocktail. After the bar closed, I worked up the liquid courage to ask her back to my place. She politely declined, wanting to take things slow. I totally respected that and assumed things were progressing well between us. The next morning, I texted Ella thanking her for the amazing night and expressing how much I looked forward to date number 2. Shockingly, her responses seemed far less enthusiastic than during and after our date. She replied courteously, but with none of the flirtatious tone from before. I chalked it up to her just being less forward when sober. Our second date was scheduled that Tuesday at a popular Italian restaurant. I dressed sharp again and arrived on time, expecting a similar night to our first. However, the conversation was stilted right from the start this time. Things felt awkward and forced. We struggled to find common ground to discuss. The silences between us became painful and prolonged. It became sadly obvious there just wasn't any in-person chemistry between us, despite how well our online banter had flowed. After rushing through dinner, I paid the check and we parted ways outside the restaurant with an uncomfortable handshake. She hurried off to grab a taxi without a backwards glance. I texted Ella when I got home politely saying I didn't think we were very compatible romantically and wished her well. She read the message but never replied. Oh well, I thought sometimes you just don't click with someone. Time to move on. A few days later, I met up with some coworkers after work at our regular happy hour bar for some much needed drinks. We grabbed seats at the bar and I dove into catching up with my buddies. About halfway through my beer, I noticed a familiar face enter the bar, Ella. She sat down alone at a table close by but didn't even look my way. I asked all my coworkers if they knew her or had invited her, but no one had any idea who she was. Strange, I thought. What was she doing here alone? I tried to ignore Ella's presence and continue my conversations, but I could feel her eyes burning into the back of my head. The constant glare made me so uneasy I couldn't focus. After about an hour, the tension became unbearable, and I decided to call it a night and head home early. The next evening after finishing up at the office, I headed to my gym for a workout like usual. I was changing in the locker room when I heard the door open behind me. I turned around and to my complete shock saw Ella standing there staring at me. I yelped in surprise and she just blinked slowly before exiting without a word. My hands shook as I immediately went to find the manager and make sure Ella left the premises. Something did not feel right here at all. In the weeks that followed, Ella continued to inexplicably show up in places I frequented on a regular basis. I saw her waiting in the lobby of my apartment building when I got home. I noticed her sitting alone at a table next to mine at my favorite coffee shop before work. I ran into her strolling the aisles at my neighborhood grocery store on the weekend. She would just give me an icy glance and then disappear before I could approach her. It became apparent Ella was intentionally stalking me and showing up wherever I went. But for the life of me, I couldn't understand how she knew so much about my daily routine when we had only been on 2 dates. I certainly never revealed personal details like my home address, gym location, or coffee shop. The idea that she was essentially following me wherever I went creeped me out immensely. I decided to completely block Ella's number and all of her social media accounts to stop any further contact. I also filed a police report so there would be documentation in case her obsessive behavior escalated. Unfortunately, the cops said there was not much they could do at this point unless she made overt threats or showed up directly at my door. I vowed to be much more selective and cautious about meeting any future online dates in person. I should have trusted my instincts from the very beginning. When he suggested recording our day for memories, something felt off. But he was so charming and persistent, and it went along with it. Little did I know the nightmare that was about to unfold. The date started well enough. We met for drinks at a cozy little bar downtown called Nick's. I remember admiring the warm, rustic decor as we walked in. He had picked a cute spot. We sat across from each other in a booth in the back corner. A little intimate for a first date, but it was a Tuesday night and pretty quiet there. He started telling me about his recent trip to Ireland, showing me pictures on his phone of him hiking the cliffs of Moher. I grinned and nodded along, thinking he seemed well-traveled and adventurous. Our conversation flowed easily. We ordered another round of drinks. I felt a warm buzz and loosened up. That's when he first brought up recording our date. You know, we should capture this special night somehow. For memories, he said with a playful wink. I laughed it off, thinking he was just being funny, but he kept bringing it up as the night went on. Come on, it'll be fun to look back on someday. He insisted cheerfully. The third or fourth time he asked, I finally relented. Okay, fine, I said, rolling my eyes. Thinking one quick video couldn't hurt. Oh, how wrong I was. As we left the bar, he put his arm around my shoulder, pulling out his phone with his other hand. Smile, he said, as he started recording us walking down the street. At the time, I thought it was innocent enough, just a memento of him walking me in my car. But looking back now, I see the red flags. He was a little too eager, too insistent about filming us. We ended up going back to his place for a nightcap. In retrospect, that was my biggest mistake. His sleek, high-rise apartment made me feel sophisticated, like I was living out a scene in an indie rom-com. If I had known then what I know now, I would have insisted we end the date there. Instead, I ignored my nagging doubts. He mixed us cocktails and put on some music. We settled into his couch with our drinks and fell into easy conversation again. I felt myself being drawn in by his charm and wit. Slowly my guard began to drop. He started finding excuses to record us on his phone, toasting our drinks, dancing goofily to a song. All very innocuous at the time. It makes my skin crawl to think about now. Eventually he joined me on the couch, nuzzling up beside me. The mood shifted. His filming became more frequent and his questions more intimate. He asked about my dating history, my family, my dreams and goals. All of his phone remained trained on me. By this point I was quite tipsy and simply went along with it, laughing off his more intrusive questions, letting him continue to film, not realizing how exposed I was allowing myself to become. When we finally parted ways, I felt a twinge of doubt but pushed it down. He kissed me goodnight and promised to take me out again soon. As the Uber pulled away, I figured I would probably never see him again. I thought that would be the end of it, but my nightmare was just beginning. The next morning, I awoke to a slew of Instagram notifications, missed calls and texts from friends asking if I was okay. Utterly confused, I opened the app to see my own face plastered across my feed. He had edited together footage from our date into some kind of viral prank video titled First Date Disaster. I felt the blood drain from my face as I watched it, completely mortified. He had spliced in crass commentary and absurd reaction shots, turning our intimate evening into a joke for public consumption. Over the next few days, my humiliation only grew. The video spread rapidly, infiltrating not just my social circles, but tapping into some internet-wide thirst for schadenfreude. Complete strangers were laughing at my expense, sending me derogatory messages, even making their own reaction videos. It was a living nightmare. I angrily confronted him over text, saying he had no right to use me as a punchline. But he just replied saying it was all in good fun, feigning ignorance over how damaging it was. He refused to take the video down, callously ignoring my pain for the sake of clicks and views. I felt powerless watching my life unravel before my eyes. I couldn't bring myself to go to work or see friends. I shut myself in, crippled by shame and anxiety. For a while, I just hoped it would blow over on its own eventually, but it only seemed to pick up steam as it spread to more and more corners of the web. Finally, I found the strength to start taking action. I contacted a lawyer who assured me we had grounds for a lawsuit. We drafted up an official complaint citing invasion of privacy, turning my own personal hell into a formal legal document, somehow validating my experience in a small way, like reclaiming just a sliver of the agency that had been stripped from me. The weeks that followed were consumed by the grueling legal process, statements, affidavits, negotiations, reliving the violation over and over again in clinical legal terms. My lawyer warned it would likely be a lengthy uphill battle, but I was determined to look this demon in the eye and fight. Our restraining order finally convinced him to remove the original video, but the ripples of trauma continued to disrupt my life in countless ways. Anytime I tried to move on, I was yanked back into the past. A friend would ask delicately about that video of you. Photos of me still circulating in the dark corners of the web, my name permanently associated with a degraded fictional version of myself. Bit by bit, I retreated from the world, going offline completely, changing my number, moving across town. walling myself off in an attempt to leave it all behind. But you can't outrun trauma. It goes with you. The isolation only bred more pain, keeping me locked in the lonely prison of my own mind. Months later, I finally started therapy. Just being able to talk through it helped immensely. I began to process and contextualize what I had been through, and remembered who I was before that ill-fated night tried to rewrite my identity. It's been a long, ongoing process of reclaiming myself. Some days are still consumed by anger and shame when the weight of it all hits again, but focusing on the light ahead keeps me going. It started out like any other Tinder date. I matched with Anna a few days ago and we hit it off right away. Our conversations flowed easily online, touching on shared interests, funny dating stories, and our hopes for finding a real connection. When she suggested meeting up in person, I readily agreed, excited at the prospect of taking our banter offline. We decided to meet at my apartment for a casual first date. I tidied up, stocked the fridge with drinks, and waited eagerly for her arrival. Right on time, there was a knock at the door. I opened it to find Annette standing there, just as cute as her photos. We exchanged a bit of awkward small talk, both of us suddenly shy now that we were face to face. Trying to break the ice, I offered her a glass of wine and suggested we order some food. We settled on pizza as we moved to the living room. As we waited for the delivery, conversation began to flow more smoothly. The wine helped relax us both, and we found ourselves chatting and laughing easily. Over pizza and more wine, we continued getting to know each other. We talked about our families, past relationships, pop culture we loved. Annette was bright, funny, and a great listener. I was really enjoying her company. After a few hours, I realized it was getting late, but neither of us was eager to call it a night. When I tentatively brought up Annette heading home, she hesitated. She said she had taken an Uber over and didn't feel comfortable traveling alone this late. She asked somewhat shyly if she could just spend the night and head home in the morning. I was a bit surprised by the request since we had just met. I could understand her concern over a late Uber ride. She seemed sweet and I didn't get any bad vibes, so I agreed she could crash in my spare room. In the morning, I awoke to the smell of coffee and found Annette already up, making breakfast in the kitchen. She cheerily said she wanted to thank me for my hospitality by cooking us a nice meal. I'll admit I felt a little weird about her making herself so at home, but also didn't want to come across as rude or unappreciative. We ate together while making more small talk. When we finished, I casually mentioned that I could give her a ride home whenever she was ready, but she seemed in no hurry to leave. Instead, she insisted on washing the dishes, then made herself comfortable on the couch as if settling in for the day. Confused but still trying to be polite, I didn't press the issue. Over the next couple days, Annette just never left. She continued acting like she lived here, cooking, cleaning, making herself at home. Each time I suggested she head out, she came up with some excuse to linger just a little longer. She was charming and fun to be around, so I told myself maybe I was just reading too much into things. But as days turned to weeks with Annette firmly entrenched in my space, the situation became stranger and stranger. Possessions of hers began accumulating in my drawers and closets. She rearranged furniture and decor to her liking. She even chided me when I went out without telling her first, as if reporting to a spouse. I started dropping heavier hints about Annette going back to her own place, but she always smoothly deflected or changed the subject. My gentle suggestions turned into firmer assertions that this indefinite sleepover needed to end. But she refused to budge, insisting with unnerving confidence that I had invited her to stay as long as she wanted. As her behavior crossed line after line, I knew in my gut something was very wrong. But her cheerful obliviousness to my growing discomfort kept me second-guessing myself. I started avoiding her at home, staying late at work or out with friends to minimize our interactions. But this only seemed to make her more clingy and emotional when I was around. Things finally reached a breaking point one evening when I came home to find her angrily waiting up for me, demanding to know where I had been. The ensuing argument was heated and unsettling. For the first time, I was truly afraid of Annette as she irrationally accused me of deceit and betrayal. I knew in that moment I had to get her out of my home and my life for good. The next day, I arranged for a locksmith to come change my locks while Annette was out running errands. I piled up her scattered belongings for easy removal. When she returned that evening, I handed her the box of items and bluntly stated she was no longer welcome and needed to leave immediately. Annette was eerily calm at first as she slowly looked through the box. Then she became tearful, pleading with me to reconsider. When I stood firm, Tears turned to fury, and she began screaming threats, promising to make me regret ever crossing her. As she berated me, I simply took her by the arm, escorted her out the door, and locked it securely behind her. I spent that first night on edge, nervously checking the locks multiple times. But Annette was true to her word, immediately making my life a living hell through unrelenting texts and voicemails. She showed up places she knew I would be, causing scenes unless security intervened. She even vandalized my car and destroyed a sentimental memento from my past. Her obsessive harassment went on for weeks, escalating at a terrifying pace. I worried over what she might do next and knew I couldn't keep looking over my shoulder indefinitely. So I packed my essentials and left town, not breathing easy until I had put several states between us. Settling into an anonymous new apartment, I finally felt a measure of relief, but I knew as long as Annette was out there consumed by her delusions about our relationship, the nightmare wasn't truly over. This chilling ordeal would forever make me cautious about who I let into my life, both virtually and in person. My once enthusiastic faith in online dating had been shattered in the most traumatic way possible. I had been using dating apps for a while with no luck finding a real connection. Then I matched with Tasha. She was gorgeous, tall, fit, with long dark hair and piercing green eyes. We messaged back and forth for a few weeks before finally meeting up for dinner. The date went amazingly. The conversation flowed effortlessly, and we really hit it off. Tasha was smart, funny, and charming. It was like we had known each other for years. I was definitely feeling sparks. After dinner, we went for a long walk, just talking and getting to know each other better. When we finally parted ways, I couldn't stop thinking about her. We made plans for a second date a few days later. Again, everything just clicked with Tasha. She seemed totally into me too. After the third, fourth, and fifth perfect dates over the next few weeks, I decided I wanted to take things to the next level. But that's when I started to notice some odd things about Tasha. Whenever I asked about her family or where she grew up, she gave vague answers and quickly changed the subject. She never wanted to meet at her place either. It seemed like she was intentionally keeping parts of her life private from me. At first, I brushed it off, thinking maybe she just had a troubled childhood or family issues she didn't want to discuss yet. But it kept nagging at me. After a couple months of dating, I realized I still knew next to nothing about her background. I decided to do some light social media snooping to see if I could find anything about her family or hometown that would explain her secrecy. That's when I uncovered a Facebook photo that made my heart drop. It was a picture of Tasha with a man and young boy tagged at a family reunion. In the photo, she had her arms around the man, and they looked like a happy couple. The little boy even resembled her. I was in total shock. This was concrete proof that Tasha had a whole hidden family life that she'd been keeping from me our entire relationship. I felt sick to my stomach imagining she might be married or have a child that I knew nothing about. My mind raced imagining what else she could be hiding from me. I didn't mention what I found right away. I was still processing and trying to figure out my next steps. But the next time I saw Tasha, I cautiously brought up her family. Just as she always did, she quickly steered the conversation in another direction. That's when I blurted out that I knew about the man and boy in the photo. I'll never forget the look on her face. She went sheet white. Tasha started stumbling over her words, trying to explain it away, but I could tell she knew she'd been caught. Finally, Tasha came clean. The man was her husband and the boy was her son. She admitted she'd been keeping her family life a total secret from me and everyone else we knew. She claimed it was to protect them, but there had to be more to the story. That's when things took an even darker turn. Tasha explained that her husband is an extremely dangerous man. She hesitated to tell me exactly what he did, but said he's a powerful figure in an underground criminal enterprise. Her son didn't even know what his dad did for a living. She begged me not to say anything to anyone, insisting my life would be at risk if her husband ever found out about us. I was completely floored and frankly terrified. This woman I had been dating for months had a secret family, and her husband was apparently some kind of violent criminal. What kind of mess had I gotten myself into? I wanted to run and never look back, but Tasha kept saying it was too risky for me to just disappear from her life now. She swore she'd keep me safe and find a way for us to be together, but I could tell she was scared too. Her hands were shaking and she had tears in her eyes. I didn't know what to believe. My emotions were all over the place after that. I felt betrayed that Tasha had so completely deceived me about her life. I was also worried that I was now embroiled in some dangerous criminal underworld just by being associated with her. But part of me did have real feelings for Tasha that were hard to simply shut off. I wanted to protect her from her clearly dangerous husband. I couldn't bring myself to just abandon her, even after the lies. But I knew I had to get away from this toxic situation one way or another. Over the next few weeks, I slowly distanced myself from Tasha while coming up with an escape plan. I told her we needed to take a break while I processed everything. Meanwhile, I secretly made arrangements to move out of state for a new job. Once I was safely far away, I broke things off with Tasha completely. She tried desperately to get me to stay, but I knew I had to remove myself fully from her web of lies. I felt bad for her, but it was too risky and toxic. I've never told a soul the full truth about what really happened with Tasha. I just said we weren't right for each other and left it at that. I still worry that someday her criminal husband will track me down for being involved with his wife. But for now, I'm just thankful I got out when I did before I found myself in even deeper trouble. Dating Tasha turned out to be the biggest disaster and scariest experience of my life once her double life was exposed. I learned my lesson to stay far away from women who seem to have too many dark secrets. It all started out so perfectly. I'd met her at a friend's party. Heather was her name. The moment I saw her across the room, laughing with a group of people, I was transfixed. She had this magnetic energy about her that instantly drew me in. Her wavy blonde hair framed striking green eyes and delicate features. She carried herself with a quiet confidence, yet had a playful, approachable air. I worked up the nerve to introduce myself, and we hit it off right away. The conversation flowed effortlessly, and I was amazed at how in sync we seemed to be. After that night, we started dating, and I really thought I had met my soulmate. The first few weeks were pure bliss. We would stay up all night talking, endlessly fascinated with each other. She was wit smart yet humble, compassionate and attentive. I found myself opening up to her in ways I never had with anyone else. She had a knack for asking just the right questions to draw out my hopes, fears, and dreams. I had never felt so understood and accepted. But then small oddities began to emerge in Heather's behavior. She would sometimes stare at me with an intensity that felt uncomfortably intimate. It was as if she was peering into the deepest recesses of my mind. When I asked what she was thinking about, she'd smile secretively and say, "Nothing," as if we were sharing an inside joke I wasn't aware of. Other times, she would randomly interject things into our conversations that made no sense. "Remember when we talked about your childhood dog getting hit by a car? I know how traumatic that was for you, but we had never discussed my childhood pet." When I told her I didn't know what she was talking about, she'd frown and insist I was forgetting our conversations. At first, I thought it was harmless quirkiness, but over time, her false recollections became more elaborate and bizarre. She would vividly describe vacations we had taken together, friends I had confided in her about, gifts I had given her, none of which had actually happened. The eerie thing was she could recount all these imaginary details with such conviction. I found myself doubting my own recollections. When I tried to confront her about the inconsistencies in her stories, she cried, accused me of not caring enough to remember, or she'd angrily turn it around on me, saying I had a flawed memory and she was just trying to help me. Her manipulations were so subtle, I didn't realize what was happening at first, but gradually I started to question my own sanity. At social gatherings, Heather would discreetly undermine me, making subtle digs at my intelligence or competence. In front of others, she'd say something like, "Oh, honey, it's okay that you forgot our anniversary again." I know numbers aren't your strong suit. She'd pass it off like a joke, but her intention was clear: to chip away at my self-esteem. Alone, she utilized more direct psychological attacks to dominate me. She carried about work was exceptionally cruel. When I shared my excitement about being considered for a promotion, she reacted with sarcasm and condescension. "With your lackluster skills, don't be silly. There's no way you're qualified for that." Her cruel words haunted me, plaguing me with self-doubt. Heather also isolated me from friends and family, feeding me lies about how they were using me or didn't really care. She convinced me she was the only one I could rely on. I was too worn down to see I was falling into her trap of control. The final straw came when she sabotaged my big presentation at work, the one that could lead to my promotion. She suggested I change my entire approach the night before, overwhelming me with unnecessary edits and revisions. The result was a complete disaster. I was rattled, looked unprepared, and ended up humiliated in front of my superiors. I later learned Heather had emailed my boss, expressing concern over my mental stability and competence. She told them I was struggling to handle challenges at work and home and needed close monitoring. I was utterly mortified. It finally dawned on me as she had systematically gaslighted me, manipulated me into doubting my own perceptions, memories, and sanity in order to dominate and control me. I confronted her and ended the relationship immediately. Her subsequent stalking and harassment only confirmed I had made the right decision to walk away. She refused to accept that I was onto her games and tried to punish me for rejecting her. She called me cruel names and claimed I had abused her. Thankfully, over time, with the help of counseling and supportive friends, I regained my sense of self apart from her toxic influence. I still carry wounds from Heather's cruel deception, but I am healing. Her gaslighting taught me to trust in my own experiences and instincts. I will never again allow someone to hijack my reality and undermine my self-worth. By sharing my story, I hope others can recognize manipulative behaviors and find the courage to walk away before the damage is too deep. I see now how dangerous it is when someone makes you feel crazy for simply being yourself. I still get chills when I think back to that ill-fated first date with Shane. We had matched on a dating app a few weeks prior, and he had seemed normal enough at first. His profile pictures were attractive, tall and fit with a warm smile. When we started chatting, the conversation flowed easily. Shane said he was a doctor and talked passionately about his medical career. I was intrigued by the idea of dating someone so intelligent and driven. When Shane asked me out on a proper date, I eagerly accepted. I spent that morning getting ready, taking extra time on my hair and makeup. I wanted to look nice for this handsome doctor I had been matched with. I drove downtown after work and parked near the upscale restaurant we had picked out. I was a bit early, so I sat at the bar, sipping a glass of wine to calm my nerves. When Shane walked in right on time, he looked just like his photos: tidy haircut, smart blazer, and that charming grin I remembered. He greeted me with a warm hug and some compliment about how beautiful I looked. I instantly felt flattered, my cheeks flushing pink. This seemed incredibly promising already. Over dinner, Shane kept the conversation flowing seamlessly. He asked thoughtful questions and seemed intensely interested in learning all about me and my life. Whenever I asked about him, Shane painted a picture of an ambitious but compassionate doctor devoted to his career. He told me endearing stories about young patients he had bonded with during long hospital stays, how he would sit with sick children for hours to comfort them after losing a parent. He described the rigorous years of medical school and residency that allowed him to achieve his dream of becoming a pediatric oncologist. Shane spoke so eloquently and passionately about his patients that I was thoroughly impressed. He seemed like a deeply caring doctor who went above and beyond. As the date continued, Shane suggested we go for a walk through a nearby park after dessert. The summer evening was perfect, just the right temperature with a lake breeze. As we strolled along the walking paths, Shane reached for my hand, interlacing his fingers gently with mine. I felt those nervous butterflies again, thrilled by how well we seemed to be connecting. Shane told me more stories from his hospital as we walked, pointing out constellations overhead, his arm eventually wrapping warmly around my shoulders. But as the night wore on, I gradually began noticing peculiar inconsistencies and holes in some of Shane's stories. At one point, you referred to the children's hospital as Memorial instead of the actual name, Midwest Children's. He also used the wrong terminology for certain pediatric cancer diagnoses and treatments he should have been familiar with. When I asked innocent questions to clarify, he stammered over his words and backtracked. For someone who had supposedly worked at this hospital for years, the mistake seemed bizarre. As we looped back towards the restaurant parking lot, Shane took an unexpected phone call and I'd overheard him whispering about a job interview he had lined up for tomorrow. This detail immediately struck me as very odd and suspicious. Why would a dedicated doctor already employed at a major hospital be interviewing elsewhere? When Shane returned, I gently probed further about his current job, but he suddenly became evasive and refused to give any specifics about his specialty, typical shifts, or the hospital staff. I could see a nervous energy in his body language as he deflected my questions. Shane then made a hurried excuse that he needed to leave for an emergency at the hospital. We exchanged an awkward goodbye beside my car. The earlier romantic atmosphere now evaporated. As I drove home alone that night, replaying the date in my mind, I felt certain in my gut that something was very off about Shane. When I got home, I spent over an hour scouring the internet for any evidence that a Dr. Shane Matthews worked at Midwest Children's Hospital. Absolutely nothing came up linking his name to the hospital or even the city. No social media profiles or credentials or anything. My heart sank as I realized without a doubt that I had been completely duped. Shane was clearly not the successful, big-hearted pediatric doctor he so convincingly claimed to be. Every detail, every story had likely been a complete fabrication to make himself seem more impressive on a dating app. I felt like such a fool for being lured in by a fantasy. I'd never heard from Shane again after that confusing, disappointing first date, but the experience rattled me deeply, destroying my trust in strangers. From then on, I vowed to be much more skeptical and cautious when online dating. I needed to keep my eyes open for red flags and inconsistencies to protect my safety around unfamiliar men. That horrifying first date was a tough but necessary lesson about vulnerability and manipulation. In hindsight, I'm grateful I uncovered Shane's elaborate lies when I did, before I could become even more invested. The memory still makes me shudder, but it taught me to trust my inner voice and critical thinking in order to avoid winding up in dangerous situations with deceitful, predatory men. I emerged wiser and wouldn't make those mistakes again. I'll never forget that fateful first date with Allison. We had matched on Tinder a few weeks prior, and from her profile, she seemed absolutely perfect. Her bio described her as a straight A student at a prestigious university, pursuing a double major in business and economics. I was thrilled when she agreed to meet up for dinner. When I arrived at the trendy upscale Italian restaurant downtown where we had agreed to meet, Allison was already seated at our table towards the back, perusing the menu nonchalantly. My jaw nearly hit the floor when I saw her in person for the first time. Some women look better in photos, but Allison was even more stunning in real life. Dressed in a tight black cocktail dress that accentuated every curve, her toned physique looked like it belonged on the cover of Vogue. I tried to play it cool as I made my way over to the table, but inside my heart was racing uncontrollably. This woman was light years out of my league. I fumbled awkwardly through the standard first date pleasantries as we settled in. How was traffic getting here? Can I get you a drink? I sipped ice water in hopes of calming my nerves and loosening my tongue tied by her intimidating beauty. But as we eased into conversation over appetizers, I found that Allison was just as charming and quick-witted as she had seemed online. The dialogue flowed easily once initial jitters subsided. Allison led most of the discussion, telling me all about her challenging business and economics courses and extracurricular activities. She described long nights spent in the library poring over dense textbooks and team projects bringing together students from varied backgrounds. Her schedule sounded jam-packed and ambitious. I was thoroughly impressed and admittedly felt a bit inadequate in comparison. Here I was, a 25-year-old just trying to survive at my dull cubicle job, sitting across from this gorgeous and wit-smart overachiever. I counted myself the luckiest guy in the world to be on a date with a woman like this. Towards the end of dinner, as we lingered over tiramisu, Allison offhandedly mentioned struggling with some of her more demanding business coursework. She said she wished she had more time to devote to academics instead of campus clubs and maintaining a social life. Maintaining her polished image seemed to require an exhausting balancing act. My instinct was to be helpful and offer support, so I brought up my own decent writing skills, honed through a journalism minor and student newspaper stint back in college. I told Allison I'd be happy to proofread any papers or essays she needed assistance polishing up. After all, I had excelled at research and writing during my own academic days, albeit at a much less prestigious state school than her illustrious institution. Her green eyes lit up at the offer for help, and she eagerly accepted, gushing gratitude at my thoughtful gesture. I was glad I could provide some support to this amazing woman who seemed so singularly focused on academic achievement and excellence. In the weeks that followed our first date, Allison took me up on my offer to review her essays with increasing frequency. At first, it was just a paper here or there that she would send over for me to look at and suggest minor improvements and tweaks. I was happy to do it, taking it as a sign that our relationship outside of classwork was also progressing. We went on several more fun dates to museums, concerts, and shows. But before long, her schoolwork requests became more involved and time-consuming. Instead of just asking for generalized feedback, she started sending very detailed and specific instructions about how she wanted assignments completed. She provided outlines saying exactly what points needed to be hit in what order. It was more about filling the blanks than actual writing. I expressed hesitation about completing schoolwork for her, but she insisted this level of help was the only way she could keep her perfect 4.0 GPA while still having a social life outside of academics. She played coy, persuading me with compliments, inside jokes, and reminders of our amazing connection. I reluctantly gave in, foolishly believing I was just easing a brilliant but overextended woman's stress. It didn't stop there either. Soon Allison was asking me to take her exams and quizzes too, claiming test anxiety made it impossible for her to focus, and she was too much of a perfectionist to accept anything less than an A. She would praise my intelligence, saying I was a much better test taker than her. I knew what she was asking me to do crossed ethical lines, but I continued to give in, telling myself it was all to support this extraordinary woman I cared so deeply for. Before long, I found myself completing nearly all of Allison's coursework. I was writing papers, taking tests, even participating in group discussions and class presentations posing as her. She always had some excuse for why she couldn't handle the work herself that semester: illness, family issues, too many other commitments crowding her schedule. I kept believing her promises that this intense level of help was just temporary, that soon her schedule would open up again. When nagging doubts crept in about the morality of the situation, I silenced them by focusing on how much I cared for Allison. She was my girlfriend now, after all, and I wanted to support her ambitions, misguided as her methods were. Of course, Allison's intricate web of deception eventually collapsed. The phone call came during dinner one weeknight, Allison nearly hysterical on the other end. She explained that a professor had questioned her after noticing troubling discrepancies between her recent midterm exam and previous quiz scores. Her grades had dropped precipitously once I was no longer taking the test for that class. The administration was launching a full investigation into cheating allegations given the radical change. My heart sank into my stomach. I knew instantly there was no way this ruse could be covered up or explained away. Allison begged me to corroborate some stories she had concocted about having the flu during the exam or dealing with a family emergency. She even suggested trying to turn the tables by threatening the professor with a false harassment claim as leverage. But I refused to cover for her deceit anymore. Her house of cards was falling and I couldn't stop it. The next morning, racked with guilt, I went straight to the university and came clean to the administrators about everything: the papers, the exams, even attending classes and events as Allison's stand-in. They were rightfully appalled, but seemingly believed I was just a lovesick dude caught up in her web of deception. Allison denied all culpability when confronted, but the evidence against her was overwhelming. She was promptly expelled in disgrace. I narrowly avoided charges thanks to my cooperation and transparent remorse when the ugly truth came out. Still, I emerged with my reputation tarnished and pride battered after being so thoroughly duped. The story of the seemingly perfect student brought down by her own hubris became gossip fodder around campus for months. As for me, I was simply the clueless accessory used and manipulated by a skilled con artist. I'm just grateful I came to my senses before my role deepened past the point of no return. Hard lessons all around about image versus reality. When I first matched with him on Tinder, I thought I had hit the jackpot. We had so much in common politically, it seemed too good to be true. As we messaged back and forth enthusiastically over the next few days, I found myself really looking forward to finally meeting him in person. So when he suggested meeting up for coffee at a trendy new cafe downtown that weekend, I quickly agreed. As I got ready for our date that Saturday, I felt a flutter of excited nerves in my stomach. I decided to wear a flattering black dress and heels, and took extra care with my hair and makeup. This felt different than my other Tinder dates, like it could actually go somewhere. After giving myself a final once-over in the mirror, I grabbed my purse and keys and headed out, smiling to myself the whole drive over. When I arrived at the cafe, I immediately spotted him sitting alone at a table in the far corner. He looked just like his photos, tall and broad-shouldered with intense dark eyes. I took a deep breath and made my way over, willing my hands not to shake. "Hi there, it's so nice to meet you in person," I said brightly as I reached his table. He stood up to greet me, a slight smile playing on his lips as he looked me up and down. "The pleasure is mine," he said simply. His voice was deep and gravelly, and he had a peculiar intensity about him that I couldn't quite place. I sat down across from him, smoothing my dress under the table. A waitress came by and took our orders. I got an iced coffee, and he opted for plain black coffee. As soon as she left, we dove into conversation. The topics flowed easily between us, from music and books to more serious discussions about the state of the country. I was impressed by how articulate and passionate he was about his political views. He had clearly done his research and spoke with conviction. I found myself leaning in, hanging on to his every word about the need for drastic change and action. But as the date wore on, the conversation took a darker turn. His opinions grew increasingly radicalized, touching on conspiracy theories and extremist ideology. Phrases like the elite and globalist agenda began peppering his monologues. A creeping sense of unease settled in my stomach. When he fixed me with his intense gaze and started talking about the need for true patriots to take back control through any means necessary, warning bells went off in my head. I shifted uncomfortably in my seat, picking at my napkin. The upbeat chatter of the other cafe patrons suddenly sounded very far away. When he leaned in and began telling me in a low, urgent voice about a growing movement seeking recruits, I knew I had to get out of there. As he pressed me to stand with them before it's too late, I stammered some excuse about needing to leave and hastily gathered my things. I could feel his eyes burning into me as I fumbled with my wallet, threw some cash on the table, and hurried out without looking back. My heart was pounding as I rushed to my car. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting him to come chasing after me. The entire drive home, I couldn't stop replaying the date over and over in my mind, a sinking feeling in my gut. How had my nice Tinder match turned into some kind of extremist recruitment attempt? The more I thought about the cold, almost predatory look in his eye as he spoke, the more frightened I became. For the next week, I lived in a constant state of anxiety and paranoia. I was jumpy at every little sound, convinced he was lurking around every corner. I stopped using all social media and refused to leave my apartment except for work. When a car followed me home one day, I became truly terrified that I was being targeted for refusing to join his cause. Finally, I knew I couldn't stay silent any longer. I went to the police and told them everything that had happened on that ill-fated first date. As I gave my statement, I could see the concern growing on the officers' faces. They'd assured me they would open an investigation right away and advised me to take every precaution, not go out alone, keep my doors locked, report anything suspicious immediately. I left the station with a small sense of relief, but the fear lingered. In the end, the police determined my date was part of an organized local extremist group actively recruiting through online dating platforms, including Tinder. With my statement and digital evidence, they arrested him on terrorist threats charges. The news of the arrest helped put my mind at ease, but I remained wary for a long time, constantly vigilant of my surroundings. I vowed never to let my guard down like that again. The experience shook me to my core and completely changed my relationship with online dating. I realized you truly don't know anyone until you meet them face to face. Even months later, I was still dealing with the emotional fallout of that horrific first date. But it taught me an important lesson about listening to my instincts. If something feels off, don't ignore the red flags just because you want to give someone a chance. Staying silent and complacent can put you in real danger. Looking back now, all the signs were there. I just chose to overlook them. I won't make that mistake again. There are real monsters hiding behind friendly online lies, looking for the next person to manipulate. But not me. Never again. Thanks for listening in. If you like these stories and want to hear more, then please subscribe and like and support this new channel. We have more stories for you to listen to.